Introduction to World Civilizations, Chapter 3, the Egyptian Civilization. Now in this chapter, we will be dealing with the Egyptian civilization and we'll try to understand it from many perspectives. What do we expect? What do we want you to do in this chapter is that you will be able to articulate the Egyptian civilization within the context of Africa. That is quite important to be able to understand the Egyptian civilization in relation to Africa. Discuss the initial makings of Egyptian civilization, pre-dynastic Egyptian civilization and its founding fathers. And you will be able to explain dynastic Egyptian civilization and its builders. Explain early dynastic period and characterize the Old Kingdom. So let us start with first of all making the relationship of Egyptian civilization with the context of Africa. The center of Egyptian civilization is in Africa, but in time its geographical reaches cover vast areas of Africa and the Middle East as well. So all Egyptologists accept that yes, Egypt is geographically in Africa. However, there have been different views on the source of the ancient Egyptian civilization and the relationship of Egypt to Africa. So when we look at the Egyptian civilization's origin in its organic phase, it is quite African. And from its political and architectural, religious, technological, and medical developmental perspective, yes, Egyptian civilization is quite African. So Egypt is an indispensable part of Africa. So we need to consider it within the context of Africa. The initial makings of this civilization are attributed to the prehistoric eras around 5000 BCE, and the ancient Egyptian civilization began in the Nile River Valley. This was a quite fertile land. The ancient Egyptians labored hard in irrigation, in land and water management, since they needed to do that. They were surrounded by harsh environmental issues. That's why they had to work hard in different perspectives, different areas related to environmental issues. And Egypt had close contact with Nubia. It was modern day Sudan, so we need to consider Egypt with its relation to Nubia as well, since Egyptian and Nubian civilizations overlap in their material features. Let's look at the pre-dynastic Egyptian civilization and its founding fathers, since looking at such eras will help us to understand Egyptian civilization in its broader sense. And there are three aspects of Egyptian civilization we need to take into consideration. There are its genesis and its uniqueness, its roots in the Nile and the Rift Valley, and its longevity as well. The Egyptians started with a prehistoric village type of settings, and then they evolved into the most enthralling civilization in a relatively short, limited number of centuries. This is quite important. So they faced with lots of hardships, famines, wars, and environmental disasters. However, they kept on growing and they kept on reaching to the wastelands. Their borders are vastening day by day. And in this civilization, villages, communities, and even families had their own personalized gods. And this pre-dynastic Egypt lasted for over 2000 years. How about the dynastic Egyptian civilization and its builders? And pre-dynasty and early dynasty pharaohs impersonated themselves as divine gods. So this is important to understand those pharaohs as kind of reflection of divine gods. These pharaohs were very inventive, innovative, and visionary. That's why this civilization was able to evolve into a great civilization. So some Egyptian pharaohs considered themselves as mighty builders. They called themselves as Horus kings, each identifying themselves with a particular god. And the geographical conditions were also very important to understand this civilization, because the Nile River and its timely flows created a hospitable environment for some societies in this area. However, there were also hardships, episodes of famine, wars, pestilence, and environmental adversities as well. And especially in this period, first 6 dynastic pharaohs were responsible for the takeoff of the Egyptian civilization. And in the early dynastic period, under the leadership of Menes, Egypt was unified. We see here the union of the lower and upper Egypt. So this time witnessed pyramid building, especially during the 2nd, 3rd, and the 4th dynasties. In this period, the great pyramid of Giza was built for the pharaoh Khufu. And we here see the expansion of the pharaonic state on the south, east, and west. And as I have mentioned before, this landscape faced many hardships, but due to especially to the water and land management system, Egyptians were able to reduce the danger of land scarcity. And this period can be considered as the basis for the greatness of Egyptian civilization. And then we are now moving to the Old Kingdom. The 3rd dynasty under the great Pharaoh Djoser dominated especially this period. We here see the establishment of astronomy, medicine, architecture, physics, chemistry, geometry, and healthcare. There was an important figure here in this period, Imhotep. Imhotep was a scientist, priest, physician, and an architect, and he was responsible for building Saqqara pyramid in Memphis for Pharaoh Djoser. And Egypt in this period grew to become a mighty empire and a warrior nation. There were wars with different nations here. And hieroglyphic scripting was a style of writing in the civilization. However, it was not possible to decipher this writing of the Egyptians before the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, which was found in 1799. So with the help of the different translations on the stone, the archaeologists were able to decipher hieroglyphic writings of the Egyptians. So we learned a lot about this civilization. When we look at the ancient Egyptian civilization, here you can see the timeline, and you can also see the details in your book. It started with the pre-dynastic period, the first founding pharaohs, the designers, incomparable engineers, and builder pharaohs afterwards. Then we see some kind of institutional decay, decentralization, and the demise of the throne of the pharaoh. And then there is the resurrection period, the resurrection of the mighty Egyptian empire, and then the twilight of the pharaoh's power. Then there is the invasion of Greek and Roman civilization in Egypt. And then finally we have the Islamic Egypt, and here we can consider the end of the Egyptian civilization. So far in this chapter, we have investigated Egyptian civilization within the context of Africa. And then we talk about initial makings of the Egyptian civilization in this chapter, pre-dynastic and dynastic Egyptian civilization and features of those dynastic periods. And then early dynastic period, then we finally moved to the Old Kingdom. So I see you in the 4th chapter.